They will never hear the screams you swallowed. You walked through winters no one saw, smiled at dinners where your soul starved, clenched your jaw while their words carved into you. But silence made you a blade, and exile turned you into strategy. You weren't broken, you were tempered. There's a war inside you, not of rage, but of restraint. You don't want applause, you want control. You don't want followers, you want silence. They mistook your stillness for weakness. They won't survive what you've survived, so stop waiting for them to understand. Burn the old self. Let the numbness speak. Let the scars teach. Let the wolves inside rise. Because kings are not born. They are carved from pain, in the cold, alone. You weren't born soft. That softness was fed to you. Fed through lullabies, through apologies, through classrooms that praised obedience over instinct. They taught you to raise your hand before you acted, to speak before you struck, to justify your movements, your thoughts, your edge. But kings don't explain. They sit still, while the world stumbles over its own noise. You flinched once, back when you still believed being loud meant being heard. Now you know better. The world doesn't reward noise. It punishes it, hunts it, drowns it. The loud, they're seen, tracked, predictable. But the silent, they become shadows. Not because they are hiding, but because they are watching. Every real man eventually learns your first throne isn't made of gold. It's made of silence. A cold, unforgiving silence, where no one claps. No one tells you who you are. No one explains why it hurts so much to let go of the boy they told you to be. But it's there, in that silence, that you begin to see. Because silence doesn't lie. Noise lies. Emotion lies. Even memory lies. But silence, it strips the illusion. It makes you sit with your choices, your failures, your unfinished wars. And in that stillness, you don't disappear. You sharpen. You begin to detach. Not because you don't feel, but because you choose to master what you feel. Instead of being mastered by it, you withdraw. Not like prey, but like a predator, who knows the value of stillness before the strike. The numbness comes. Good. Let it. It's not the death of your soul. It's the furnace. It burns away the noise, the weakness, the false attachments. Because a man cannot hear the truth until he's willing to be alone with it. This is why you retreat, not to run, but to rule. You don't need the crowd. You don't need the applause. You don't need to prove yourself in a room that's already made up its mind. You don't explain. You execute. You don't beg. You build. Let them wonder what you're thinking. Let them choke on their need for your validation. Your silence is not absence. It's dominance, disguised. It's a chessboard with no pieces on it. Because the war is being fought inside. When you speak less, you see more. When you stop explaining, you start observing. And when you stop reacting, you start ruling. This is where you become dangerous. Not when you shout, but when you go quiet. Because men like you aren't born twice. You bury the old self, the soft one, the tame one, the version of you that needed permission to breathe. Now, you inhale without asking. You move without warning. You wait, not because you're hesitant, but because you're 10 steps ahead. And while the world fills itself with distractions and dopamine, you sit in the storm, unshaken. Because silence isn't a retreat, it's a throne. And you were born to sit on it. Final beat, cold and quiet, like steel unsheathed in moonlight. Let them talk. You'll move, when it's already too late for them to stop you. Pain came, not like a storm, but like a slow drip, the kind that doesn't knock. It seeps in, wears you down, doesn't raise its voice, just waits until you're tired enough to let it stay. Rejection followed. Sharp, cold, personal. You thought it would pass. It didn't. And then came loneliness. Not the kind where you're physically alone, but the kind where you're surrounded, and still feel invisible, still feel wrong, still feel like you're too much, or not enough. That's the moment most men run. They mask it, drink it down, scroll it away, fight it with distraction, hoping the numbness will come faster than the memory. But not you. You stood still and felt it. The rawness, the ache, The slow disintegration of the man you thought you were. It didn't kill you. It carved you. And that's where the wolf in you was born. Not when you grew stronger, not when you healed, but when you bled, and refused to flinch. Because in nature, to flinch is to die. A wolf doesn't scream when it's wounded. It locks eyes. It tightens. It bleeds in silence. Because it knows, pain doesn't destroy the wolf. It identifies him. You were told that strength was loud, but strength is in restraint. It's in bearing pain, without performance, without signaling prey. They betrayed you. They humiliated you. They labeled you difficult, dangerous, too cold, too intense. And for a moment, you believed them. You shrank. Not because you were weak, but because you were untrained. You hadn't yet learned that the world will always mistake depth for damage, power for threat, masculine clarity for cruelty. You weren't broken. You were surrounded by people who never had the stomach for shadows, who ran from silence because they couldn't survive their own thoughts. But you stayed. You stayed through the betrayal, through the nights your own mind turned against you, through the hollow mornings and fake smiles. You learned to stop explaining your pain, and instead you wore it. That's the second phase of power, not becoming untouchable, but becoming unshaken. You absorb pain, without reaction. You take the hit, but never show it. Like a warrior who walks back to camp, blood dripping from his ribs. No limp, no complaint, no speech. That's not coldness, that's control. Because wolves don't flinch, they adapt. They close the gap between the blow and the next move. They bleed, but they do it privately. Not to hide, but to prepare. You thought you lost yourself. You didn't. You just flinched too loud. The boy in you wanted justice, closure, an apology. But the man in you doesn't wait for that. He sharpens in the silence. He knows some wounds don't close. They calcify, and become armor. So now, when the pain comes back, and it will, you don't react. You don't post. You don't explain. You watch. You note. You adjust. Because your pain no longer dictates your identity. It reveals your discipline. And when they come for you again, with their judgments, their chaos, their empty words, you'll smile like a soldier who already buried the worst version of himself, and kept going. One last pause, cold as steel drawn beneath the surface of calm flinch again, and you'll lose the wolf. Stand still, and he returns. Their quote, as a moment, not loud, not cinematic, not even dramatic, just quiet, still, undeniable. You look in the mirror, and for the first time you don't recognize the man looking back, and he doesn't recognize you either. It's not horror, it's betrayal, because that face, the one they praised, the one they wanted, the one you built, it isn't yours, it never was. It's a shell, crafted by fear, shaped by approval, a face carved from what they needed, not what you were. They told you to be good, so you smiled. They told you to be soft, so you folded. They loved the version of you that flinched, that bent, that silenced his instincts in the name of being enough. And you became that mask, for them, for acceptance, for belonging, for peace. But masks lie, they always do, and eventually the weight of pretending becomes heavier than the cost of breaking. That's what no one warns you about, that the path to power doesn't begin with strength, it begins with collapse. You have to watch the mirror shatter, not once, over and over, each crack revealing another lie you told yourself just to survive. You weren't too much, they were too small. You weren't broken, you were unfinished. And the face they loved, it was never yours. This is identity death, not poetic, not spiritual, raw. You stand in your own skin, and feel foreign to it. The laugh you've mastered sounds like a stranger. The voice you've trained, too smooth, too polite, too safe. You feel the heat rise, the shame, the rage, not at them, at yourself, because deep down you knew you were acting, you knew you were performing, and you stayed silent anyway. You watched your real self rot in the corner, just to be liked, and now you pay the price. This isn't where men rise, this is where they burn. No shortcuts, no affirmations, no one coming to rescue you from the collapse. You die here, or you shed. You kill the mask, or the mask kills you, because it doesn't stop. It doesn't dissolve on its own. It grows, it mutates, it becomes a parasite that eats your instincts, your fire, your edge. You start saying things you don't believe, doing things you hate, living a life that fits, but feels like a prison. And slowly, very slowly, you begin to vanish, not physically, but psychologically. Your courage dies first, then your hunger, then your soul, until all that's left is a well-dressed version of your fear, holding a phone, waiting for validation, and calling it confidence. But there is a way out, not up, out. You don't build the new you before destroying the false one. No man ascends without first crumbling into silence, realizing the monster wasn't in the world, it was in the mirror. So if it's cracking, let it. Don't fix it. Don't tape it. Don't run. Watch it fall. Let the image die. Stand there as the glass splits your comfort wide open. And if the pain comes, good. Because that's how you'll know the real one's underneath. Still alive. Still waiting. Final beat. Slow. Deliberate. Surgical. You want freedom. Kill the mask before it learns how to speak for you. Some men scream when they burn. Others, they don't blink. They sit in the fire, feel every inch of it, and don't make a sound, because pain isn't the test, it's the curriculum. The lesson isn't in the escape, it's in the combustion. You don't grow by running from the fire, you grow by becoming it. That heartbreak that gutted you, it wasn't just an ending, it was a forge. You just didn't know how to sit in it long enough to melt. That betrayal, it didn't break you, it showed you where your armor was cracked. But what did you do? You ran, drank, slept around, posted quotes, pretended the bleeding was healing. But steel doesn't harden without heat, and men don't rise without burning down first. The pain you felt, the loss, the rage, the humiliation, that was fuel. You just poured it into the wrong fire. You wanted relief, but relief is a thief. It steals the transformation. You were made to endure more than comfort. You were built to break, then reshape. Not all men are, but you were. So now you have a choice, not a soft one, not a gentle fork in the road, a brutal binary decision. Run to relief, or sit in the fire until you become something else. You want to be dangerous, then stop crying over the flame. Breathe it in, let it hollow you, let it devour the weak parts, let it kill the boy who begged for peace. In a world that only respects war, no distractions, no vices, no exit, just the burn. You want to know why you've never ascended? Because every time it got hard, you reached for a parachute. Every time it hurt, you reached for a fix, and you called it coping. Coping is survival. Alchemy is transformation. There's a difference. One keeps you breathing, the other turns you into something unrecognizable, untouchable. You think you're tough because you lift weights. That's not strength. Strength is staring into the memories that haunt you. The father that left, the woman who lied, the moments you were small, silent, scared, and not looking away. Strength is not flinching when your identity begins to crack. It's letting the pain do its job, until what's left is pure. Most men avoid pain like prey. The few, they hunt it, because they know every scar is a map, every wound, a door. But to walk through it, you have to stop crying, not forever, just long enough to burn. Because pain doesn't respect tears, it respects resolve. You think warriors don't feel, they do, but they've learned that crying is a luxury, and sometimes, luxury kills. So cry later, burn now, let it tear through you, let it turn your nervous system into firewood, let it pull every weakness to the surface and show you just how soft you've been. Because only then, when the old self is ash, do you get to rise, and you will, not as a man who avoided pain, but as one who used it, who stared into the abyss, and didn't scream, didn't run, didn't blink. Final line, cold, brutal, quiet as a blade pressed to the throat of illusion. If it doesn't burn, you're not doing it right. You weren't abandoned, you were chosen, not by a tribe, not by applause, not by comfort. You were chosen, by exile. They didn't push you out, you were pulled, by something older, darker, wiser. Because the man you were becoming couldn't be built in warmth. He needed cold, he needed silence,
He needed the wilderness, where mirrors break, masks fall, and the world forgets your name. At first you thought it was betrayal, that you were being punished, left behind. The calls stopped, the circle shrank, love turned to absence. But then, the noise disappeared, and something else entered. Not peace, not yet, awareness, the kind that only comes when no one is watching, when you stop performing, when your value isn't echoed back at you. It's questioned. That's when it happens. You begin to see yourself, as you are, without titles, without validation, without a tribe to nod in approval. Every time you fake a smile, exile strips it all. The trophies, the praise, the illusions, and it hands you one thing in return. Truth. The truth that no one is coming, no one is saving you, no one is thinking about your comeback. And for the first time, you realize, that's not a curse, it's a gift. Because the moment you stop waiting, you start building. You stop asking for direction, you become the direction. You stop begging for belonging. And remember, you weren't made to fit in, you were made to stand alone. When the world left, the warrior entered. And no, it wasn't glorious, it was brutal, boring, silent. The days bled into each other. The nights whispered doubts you'd buried for years. But in that exile, you sharpened, like a blade without a sheath, like a king without a throne, yet still carrying himself like royalty. You stopped needing to be understood, stopped explaining your intensity, stopped watering down your presence just to be palatable to people who couldn't handle their own reflection. Because exile doesn't just remove comfort, it removes the need for permission. And once that's gone, you become dangerous, not erratic, not reckless, strategic, calm, surgical, the kind of man who doesn't just move, he calculates, he watches, he waits, and when he acts, the world remembers why it was safer when he was silent. You don't belong, you were never meant to. That's why every room you entered felt too small. You weren't built to sit at the table, you were built to flip it. But you had to forget who you were first. You had to be broken, alone, exiled, because only then do you realize, you were never meant to be one of them. You were meant to rule yourself first. Exile taught you that. It gave you distance from distraction. It gave you pain as a teacher. It gave you the kind of freedom most men spend their whole lives running from. The kind that demands everything and offers nothing, except power. And now, you don't chase love, you embody it. You don't need approval, you carry proof. You don't seek revenge, you became the reason they can't sleep at night. Final pause, sharp and clean, like a knife sliding into its sheath. Let them think they left you, only you and the silence know. They just made the mistake of setting you free. There comes a moment in every man's war, when he realizes his greatest weapon is stillness. Not muscle, not fury, not speed, stillness. The ability to see chaos, to watch betrayal walk through the door wearing a familiar face, to feel the sting of insult aimed straight at the throat, and not flinch, not blink, not explain, not defend, because when you stop reacting, you stop bleeding power, and when that happens, you become That's what they don't tell you. They sell you emotional expression like freedom. They tell you to be open, reactive, loud. But kings don't bark, they stare, stone-faced, unshaken, and in that silence they own the room. Because he who shows least, controls most, not because he's dead inside, but because he chooses what touches his fire. You think your rage is strength, your tears, your outbursts, they're signals, and signals are breadcrumbs that wolves follow. You think they didn't notice how quickly you snapped when she ignored your text, how defensive you got when they questioned your worth. They saw it all, and they smiled, because a man who reacts is a man they can bend, and a man they can bend is already on his knees. But not you, not anymore, because now you understand. Your calm makes them scream, your silence drives them mad. When you don't blink, they start to wonder what you know, what you're planning, what you've seen. It's chess, not checkers. They move with noise, you move with absence. They want chaos, you become the eye of the storm. And in that eye, nothing rattles, You hear the insult, but you measure the intent behind it. You feel the rejection, but you don't chase the void it opens. You see the trap, but you don't announce that you've seen it. You just keep walking, eyes forward, face still, mind sharp, because to not blink is to declare psychological war. A war you win by doing less, saying less, showing less. That doesn't make you cold, it makes you precise. You're no longer playing to be understood, you're playing to control the tempo, and when they can't get a read on you, they'll project, they'll panic, they'll fill the silence with their own doubt. Good, let them drown in it, because your power isn't in proving anything, it's in watching everything. You've trained your nervous system like a blade, your breath, a weapon, your gaze, a verdict. And when the storm rises, you don't speak, you don't move, you wait, coiled like war, because that's when they realize, the man who doesn't blink, isn't numb, he's calculating, he's already seen how it ends, and he's decided, he won't waste energy warning you. Final beat, no echo, just the sound of clarity breaking skin. If they can see you bleed, you've already lost. You think power comes from having the last word, that if you speak loud enough, explain well enough, rage hard enough, they'll finally understand, finally respect you, finally see you. But kings don't argue, they vanish, not out of weakness, out of precision, because once you've been dragged into noise, you've already surrendered the throne. You can't rule a battlefield built on emotion. You walk away from it, you build your own. They'll call it ghosting, they'll call it arrogance, they'll say you're avoiding the truth. Let them talk, because the truth, it doesn't live in arguments, it lives in results, and results are built in silence. The weak stay to be understood, the strong leave to evolve, and there's a difference between leaving and vanishing. One is escape, the other is elevation. When you vanish, it's not just absence, it's a message, a lesson, a line drawn in the ground where a king once stood, and will never stand again. Your withdrawal is not emotional, it's tactical. You don't leave in rage, you leave in mastery. No slamming doors, no dramatic exits, just stillness. You remove your presence like a sword from flesh, quiet, clean, undeniable. Because when a man like you leaves without a trace, without a plea, without a performance, that silence teaches more than any argument ever could. It haunts, it lingers, it forces them to face the void where your energy once filled the room. And make no mistake, your energy was the room. You gave light, you gave heat, you gave fire. Now, you give nothing, and that's when they feel everything. Because the absence of a king is louder than the presence of a pawn. And when you vanish, you make them beg for your shadow. You don't need to prove your value, you prove it by not needing to. You don't need to defend your character. Your distance is the verdict. That's what they never teach you. That the most powerful move is to disappear with dignity, to exit while they're still speaking, to walk before they finish insulting, to vanish so clean they choke on your silence. And here's the truth most can't swallow. You don't win by convincing people to value you. You win by removing yourself from the equation entirely, letting the void echo louder than your voice ever could. Not out of spite, out of principle, because kings don't beg, they build. And if you're arguing, you're not building, you're still trying to convince the village that banished you that you're royalty. Stop. You were never meant to be understood by them. You were meant to rule far from them. And every time you try to stay, you trade your crown for crumbs. No more. You leave now. You walk away from small minds, shallow love, and loud, empty chaos. You don't slam the door. You don't look back. You don't even leave a note. You leave the memory of your strength behind, and let it speak for you. Final pause. Not a whisper, not a scream, just truth, pressed like steel against the soul. Leave so clean, they pray your silence becomes mercy. They laughed at your wounds, they pointed, mocked, whispered behind teeth, too soft to know what real pain tastes like. They saw your broken moments, and called them proof that you were weak, that you weren't built for this, that you'd fold, just like they did, but they don't understand. They never did, because men like you don't wear shame, you wear scars, and you wear them like armor. Every betrayal, every failure, every time you were overlooked, underestimated, or thrown to the wolves, you came back sharper, harder, colder, not numb, disciplined. That's the difference. You didn't run from pain. You studied it, sat with it, let it carve new edges into your soul, until the version of you that could break no longer existed. You thought your scars made you damaged, but scars don't damage. They document, they prove one thing, and one thing only. You've been to hell, and you didn't fold. You want to know what separates men who rise from those who rot. It's not talent, it's not charm, it's not luck, it's what they do with the pain. Most bury it, pretend, patch it up with addiction, distraction, and noise, but the few, they weaponize it. They take the humiliation, the shame, the agony, and alchemize it into focus, into drive, into silence that hits harder than any scream ever could. You think kings are born in comfort. No, kings are crowned by their scars, by the battles they didn't walk away from, by the storms they didn't just survive. They used. Every scar on you tells a story, not a failure, a forging. They don't fade, they forge, they sharpen your instincts, they quiet your impulses, they remind you what happens when you forget who you are. You look in the mirror and see damage. Look again. That's armor, built in darkness, polished in silence, worn with pride, because you don't need to prove your strength to anyone. You are the proof. You walk into rooms now with a calm edge, not because you're trying to intimidate, but because you've already lived what most men fear. You've already lost what they cling to, already bled for what they only talk about, already rebuilt from ruins they would have died in. That's why your presence is heavy, why your silence echoes, why your eyes don't flinch. It's not because you're broken, it's because you've been broken, and came back built. So stop hiding your scars, stop dressing them up, stop explaining them to people who've never earned one. They are not your shame, they are your credentials. You want to lead from the wound that never healed.
The one that taught you how to breathe while bleeding. The one that made your rage go quiet. The one that turned your heart into a weapon you now wield, not worship. Because a man with no scars is either lying or untested. And you've been tested. You've been left, lied to, broken, and blamed. And still you're here, standing, breathing, ready. Final line, cold, quiet, undeniable. You don't need applause. Your scars already clapped. Power is cold, not cruel, not heartless, just cold. Because it's earned in silence. Not applause, not agreement, not the warmth of belonging. You rise alone, or you don't rise at all. The world taught you to chase approval, to seek mirrors that smile back, to measure your worth by reaction. But kings don't ask to be seen. They stop needing to be. You learn that when the pain has done its work, when exile has stripped you bare, when the mask is buried, when the fire has taken what was soft and left what can't be broken, that's when the crown appears. Not placed, not gifted, found, in the ash, in the silence, in the long night when even your shadow leaves you. And when you put it on, you finally understand why they feared this path. The weight, the chill, the knowing. Because to wear the crown is to walk with ghosts, to carry the burden of your own sovereignty. No audience, no echo, just the whisper of your own decisions, and the silence that follows them. You become the one they look to, not because you told them to, but because your stillness says what your words never will. You stopped bleeding to be understood, stopped shrinking to be accepted, stopped performing. Now you rule, not with noise, but presence, not with fear, but precision, not with love, but clarity. And clarity is cold, because it doesn't flinch, doesn't explain, doesn't chase. It simply knows. You don't wait for followers. You move, and if they come, fine. If they don't, you keep walking. Because your path was never a parade. It was a war path, and you were forged to walk it, alone. The fire walkers don't need tribes. They become the fire. And the crown, it doesn't burn. It freezes. Because you've burned already. You've buried every soft version of yourself that begged for warmth. And now, you don't beg. You don't even look back. There's no need. You've become what most fear becoming. Fully accountable. Fully alone. Fully free. That's why the throne is always at the top of the mountain. Because no one climbs with you. They watch from below. They cheer. Or they doubt. But they do not follow. And you don't wait. Because leadership isn't about being liked. It's about carrying the weight no one else will touch. And when you've seen what you've seen, felt what you've felt, lost what you've lost, you realize the crown was never about power over others. It was about power over yourself. Discipline, detachment, dominance of the inner kingdom. Not a crown that shines. A crown that cuts. Because only the fire walkers wear it. Only the ones who've sat with madness and came out thinking sharper. Only the ones who don't flinch when loyalty fades. Only the ones who stopped chasing comfort and became the storm. So no, you're not warm anymore. You're not soft, not accessible, not seeking. You've traded all of that for something quieter, stronger, heavier. And when they ask why your eyes look distant, why your energy changed, why you no longer come down to explain yourself, tell them nothing. Kings don't explain. They build. They lead, they vanish, and they rule. Final breath, sharp, final, like a blade sealed in frost. The crown is cold, but so are you now. You weren't reborn, you were revealed. There was no light breaking through the clouds, no angelic music, no hand pulling you up from the darkness. There was only the sound of ash settling, and silence. The kind of silence that doesn't ask questions, it just knows. You passed through it all. Not untouched, not clean, but intact. And that's what matters. You didn't transcend. You endured. You didn't find peace. You became it. Because peace isn't a place. It's posture. The way you hold yourself after the fire. Not soft. Not bitter. Just forged. They'll say you changed. But they're wrong. You were never soft. Just untested. Never broken. Just buried. And now that you've stopped explaining, stopped reacting, stopped begging the world to reflect you, you've returned, not to who you were, but to what you always were, before they taught you to flinch, before they softened your instincts, before they convinced you to doubt your own fire. You remembered. And now, you move without permission, speak without apology, lead without needing to be followed, because that's what forged men do. They don't chase light. They carry it. Cold, quiet, and heavy like a weapon they no longer need to draw. There's no celebration, no crown handed to you, only the weight of who you've become. A man who no longer waits, no longer hopes, no longer needs noise to feel real. You walk now like a storm that already passed. Still, clear, undeniable. They'll call you distant, call you cold, say you've lost your softness. Let them. Cold kept you alive. Cold taught you how to breathe under pressure, how to think when the world screamed, how to move when the ground disappeared. Warmth made you want to be loved. Cold made you impossible to break. So no, you're not warm anymore. You're fire contained, heat, disciplined, a war machine in the shape of a man. There's no speech to give, no one to convince, only the path ahead, built in silence, paved in scars, marked by decisions no one saw you make. They'll look at you now and see distance. What they won't see is what it cost. The nights you walked through without anyone. The parts of you had to kill. The hunger you had to starve. The masks you burned to the ground. You didn't just go through the fire. You became it. And now, you don't chase. You don't cling. You don't explain. You just move. With that slow, relentless pace of a man who's not running from anything, or toward anything. You've already arrived. No crown, no throne, just presence. The kind that bends a room, the kind that makes even silence feel heavy. And if they ask who you are now, don't answer. Let them feel it. Because you're not here to be understood. You're here to be remembered. The fire didn't change you. It revealed what was always there. A man they'll never soften again.